How delighted I am to be here with you all again. For one thing, it gives me a chance in person to thank you for your many kindnesses to my family and me over the past 2 months, really over the past 30 years. You're a bunch of sweethearts. That's what you are, and I hope you know that. I can attest to it. I really can. It's not quite Easter yet, a week to go in fact, but I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm going to preach an Easter sermon anyway. After all, there can never be too many Easter sermons, not really. In fact, if I were to come to church only once a year, I would almost certainly choose Easter. Easter is a better choice than Christmas. Christmas doesn't have death in it, not at its very center anyway. And if you're going to go to church only very rarely, church should always have death in it. Christmas does have animals and presents and babies and stars, and these are all splendid things, I assure you. And Christmas has birth. But Easter has death and rebirth. Birth is essential, but for our spiritual journey, death and rebirth are far more consequential. Easter also has flowers, of course, but flowers don't have anything to do with Easter. They have to do with spring, which is another splendid thing. I have nothing against flowers. They are almost as splendid as animals, presents, babies, and stars. But Easter is not about flowers. Flowers are beautiful, yes, for a season, and then languish and die, just as we do. But then they cast their seeds to the wind, seeds which crack open, springing new, identical life from the husk of death. It's a pretty metaphor. There's only one problem with it. We're not flowers. And Easter is about us. I have no idea whether Jesus was physically resurrected or not, but I suspect that he wasn't. If I'm right, for many people, that would be it for Jesus. Period, end of story. Christianity would be a delusion, a miscommunication of events faithfully transmitted from generation to generation for 2,000 years. File it with the Easter bunny under springtime fantasies. Bequeath it to Harvard psychologists as evidence for cognitive dissonance. Or to Jesus, the Jesus Seminar, a brace of New Testament scholars who, after 30 years of careful deliberation, dropping little colored beads into boxes, can find no compelling evidence that the resurrection took place. That this fails to shake my faith is irrelevant because my faith is not based on the bodily resurrection of Jesus. I ground my faith, my Christian faith, instead in the spiritual rebirth of Jesus' followers, a saving transformation as available to us today as it was to his disciples so many years ago. For millions around the world, the greatest story ever told is the story of Jesus, the carpenter's son. Yet it is a story without any of the markings by which the world measures success. No riches, no earthly power, not to mention that the hero dies young, branded a criminal, and nailed to a cross. Yet all of us, whether Christian or not, can draw meaning from this tale. His courage can sustain our courage and deepen our understanding of the complex interplay among love, death, and freedom. Jesus on Palm Sunday, this day we celebrate this morning, entered Jerusalem with fanfare, leading a band of followers who believed that he was the Messiah. Within a week, he was betrayed by one of his disciples, brought before Pilate, sentenced, and crucified. His followers disbanded and went into hiding in fear for their own lives. His chief disciple, Peter, forswore him 3 times rather than admitting to any knowledge of him. This is not the way that the story was supposed to turn out. By ancient tradition, the promised Messiah, Scion of David, King of the Jews, would march triumphantly into Jerusalem to be crowned. Apparently, this was the expectation of many of Jesus' Palm Sunday followers. The problem was, their expectation had nothing whatsoever to do with Jesus' gospel. Reminding us that the world doesn't owe us a living, rather that it is we who owe the world a living, our very own. Jesus' good news celebrates first and foremost the gift of sacrificial love. Take his most challenging injunction. By loving our enemy, we give away our entitlement to revenge. We sacrifice our pride. We also sacrifice our sense of entitlement and all of the pleasures that go with vengefulness, bitterness, and hate. Forgiveness, too, requires sacrifice. We must sacrifice self-righteousness, our preoccupation with having been wronged, and the advantage of holding another in our debt. Finally, and most important, we must sacrifice our control over everything that lies beyond our power, including our control over others, over events, and over the future. Ultimately, the courage to be requires the courage to let go. Fear accompanies us all the way to the grave, but we needn't hold its hand or accept its cold comfort. The word sacrifice means literally to render sacred. When most believers reach out to Jesus, it is to the fully human Jesus. His are hands that we can hold. When tears well in his eyes, we know that ours are blessed. The fear of Jesus is just like our fear. He worries. He wonders if he's done all he could to accomplish his mission. And at the end of his life, for one dramatic moment, he fears that he has failed, that everything was for naught. We know that Jesus struggled with fear as he hung dying on the cross. It's written all over his last words. Jesus almost never quoted Scripture. He wasn't a biblical literalist, you know. But here we find him at the hour of his death, quoting not the comforting 23rd Psalm, but the starker 22nd. Not, I shall walk through the valley of the shadow of death and fear no evil, for thou art with me, but, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me? Instead of the comforting words that usher in the close of the 23rd Psalm, my cup runneth over, Jesus moans, I thirst. I thirst.